With shows like Game of Thrones and Westworld coming out, we are seeing expansive stories with expansive casts, and with it comes a fundamental change in storytelling that, although long existent in literature, is a fairly new development in film. Of course, everyone knows that traditionally the protagonist is the main character who endures both the internal and external journeys of which the story is comprised, and the antagonist is this character's antithesis, the one trying to stop our protagonist from achieving their goal. What then happens when there is no main character? When there's a whole ensemble of characters, each trying to achieve their individual goals, each opposing each other? Who's the protagonist and who's the antagonist? The purpose of a protagonist is for the audience to relate and empathize with the character in order to evoke the illusion of the audience member himself undergoing the journey. This is why protagonists traditionally possess universally ethical morals, as most viewers are regular people with roughly similar morals. The antagonist naturally possesses unethical morals, as they are the opposite of the protagonist, and this conflict is what most stories consist of. Now, there exists another type of protagonist called the anti-hero, and this is essentially a protagonist with the morals of an antagonist. What separates the two is a certain emphasis on the anti-hero that makes us root for him, and everyone else is a supporting character or an extra. Now this is really just a matter of labels: protagonist, antagonist, anti-hero, supporting character. Calling one character something else does not change the events of the story in any way. But it's no longer quite the same story if you consciously change the labels, because this changes the psychology of the viewer and changes the very way he understands the story. To get an understanding of the debate between who's who, let's look at one of the most debated stories of all time, The Great Gatsby. The book is written from the first-person perspective of Nick Carraway, and the film adaptation is narrated by Nick. However, the story is widely regarded as the story of Jay Gatsby as seen through the eyes of Nick Carraway. This is how it's taught in most schools, and every film adaptation has credited Gatsby before Nick. It's seen as the story of a man who went from rags to riches in order to win over his one true love, Daisy Buchanan, and to rid her of her horrible husband, Tom. Oddly enough, I've always disagreed with this. I've always seen Nick as the protagonist. It's really the story of a man who, after having a taste of war, struggles to return to his old boring life, and as a result, moves to a more exciting region. There, he meets awful people, but one of them in particular he slowly begins to realize has more depth to him than was initially thought. And as the story goes on, Nick warms up to Gatsby and really begins to love him. But then through corruption and lies and all sorts of other filth of the likes, the awful people kill Gatsby, and rather than Gatsby being portrayed as the protagonist, he becomes a martyr for the dreams that go to die in the land of the rich, his death serving as a warning for Nick to retreat back out to the Midwest. And Nick, our protagonist, not only learns not to judge people from first impressions, but he also realizes what a rich, exciting life of gratuity can lead to. An interesting case is that of the film Fargo, which intentionally blurs the lines between who's who. Now, Frances McDormand was nominated for the Best Lead Actress Academy Award for her role as Marge Gunderson, and I have no problem with that. One could see her as a lead. But William H. Macy was nominated for Best Supporting Actor for his role as Jerry Lundegaard. Now, this is a bit different than Gatsby since there's no narration, but upon further analysis, it becomes quite clear that Jerry is far more than just a supporting character. The people responsible for these nominations saw Fargo as a film about a pregnant police officer who, after going through a good deal of character development, arrests the people responsible for a kidnapping. In reality, though, Fargo is also about the consequences of Jerry Lundegaard's decision. The film starts out as he's just made a tough decision in a moral debate between pursuing his dream and remaining an ethical citizen and family member. Once he goes through with the decision, we see his life spiral out of control as he desperately tries to keep it intact. Jerry is the protagonist or anti-hero, with Marge as his antagonist, and at the same time, Marge is the protagonist with Jerry as the antagonist. They're antithetical to each other, but they parallel as they share a common antagonist, although the emphasis on Gare and Carl make them more supporting characters than leads. Then came along the show, which takes this gray area to a whole nother level, giving full story arcs to 4 different characters in its first season, and even more in its second season. From this, we can conclude that the internal conflict has far more significance than the external conflict in terms of both story and deciding who's the protagonist. There's a quote from writer John Rogers that's always stuck with me. You don't really understand an antagonist until you understand why he's a protagonist in his own version of the world. Think of it like this. You're given a coin. On one side is character A, and on the other side is character B. You flip the coin through the air, and we see both sides and get a basic understanding of both characters. Finally, the coin lands, and character A is face up. While we've gotten an understanding of both characters, we see far more of character A, and since the emphasis is on him, we root for him. Character A is the protagonist, but if factors were different, the coin could have very easily landed with character B face up, and he would have been seen as the protagonist, or at least an anti-hero. This is the traditional story setup, protagonist versus antagonist, and while novels can be far more experimental, film hasn't had as many opportunities for such large stories as they're generally confined to a couple hours. Even Fargo, which manages to pull off an incredible balancing act, only balances between two main characters. Today, though, we are in what many call the golden age of television, where a show is essentially a 70-hour-long movie, which allows for an exponentially vast amount of character development. Because of this, we can take our two-sided character coin and experiment with, say, a 20-sided die. We throw it in the air again, get a brief glimpse of everyone, but once it lands, instead of displaying a single character as a protagonist, we see an evenly sprinkled array of characters as well as a vast spectrum of conflicting moral ideas, allowing all sorts of fans to connect with all sorts of characters. Character C may be the antagonist of character E, who's the antagonist of character A, who has friends on both sides. We observe the world through an objective lens, seeing how everyone is the protagonist of their own story. This helps the story financially as they're now catering to a larger demographic, but more importantly, this creates a genuine sense of community. A wide range of characters is essential for world building, and when the writer eliminates the bias of having a single protagonist, the world simply becomes far more immersive. The art of visual storytelling is going through quite a few fundamental changes, with consequences both good and bad. Most stories will likely maintain their generic cookie-cutter formulas because, I mean, hey, what works, works. But artists bringing their stories to networks like HBO or Showtime are paving the way to a new era of vast worlds accessible right behind your computer screen. I don't know about you, but I think that's something to be excited about. Thank you.
That you